Here we go.
Do it.
Okay, cool.
Here we go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to all of our coffiners to another episode of Coffin Talkin', where we unravel the mysteries, embrace the peculiar, and find humor in the unconventional world of funerals and death. I'm Holly. I'm here with Frank, and Scott's here too.
Thanks. Before we begin, it's interesting. You should know that we're sharing a mic. So we're all in the same room, which is highly unlikely, right?
Unusual.
Yeah.
We've never all been in the same spot before.
But it
while
is
reporting.
Christmas.
It is, yes. It's Christmas, and so we're all together. And I guess, yeah, let's dive into weeks.
So my week was weak.
Was weak.
No,
right.
It wasn't too bad. We had a lot of business going on, and that was good. And then it's interesting to me, we always make the comment, death knows no holiday. And when death occurs, families know no holiday. When a death occurs, regardless of the date or scheduling of the holiday, they still want to be met with. And you try and be as nice as you possibly can because you do want some time for family. And so sometimes I think I become offensive to some of the families that call and want to be met with on, say, for specifically a day like today, who I always try and shy away from. And so we may lose business over it, but that's part of the business, right? That's what happens.
That's just part of it, yeah. Well, Scott, how was your week?
Pretty good. Had my second full week at the accounting firm that I was recently hired with.
Woo.
And I still don't know about names and stuff. I probably won't mention them. I guess if anyone needs their accounting done or their books balanced or anything, then you can email us and let me know, and you can be my client. That would be fun.
If you're looking for something as shady as just email us.
If you're looking
give us your tax information.
No, of course it wouldn't be that. But if anyone needs a good accountant, then. But it's a good office, and I'm very grateful, and I consider myself to be blessed for it. So that's a very nice thing. And that was the majority of my week. Do you have any question for me, Holly?
Coming on as a new hire?
Coming on as a new hire.
Good for you.
We have this tradition of whenever Scott's on of asking him about his love life because he's the only one that is not, I'll say, in a, how do I say this delicately? In a serious relationship. There's no ring on Scott's finger is what we'll say. So
but he told us last time we were together that he was off the market. So how's that going?
The market.
A lot can happen. Let's just say that.
So you're saying this is a bit of a sensitive subject now?
Can you see the glistening in my eyes,
Oh,
Holly?
no,
I'm just kidding, of course. Things have changed.
So once again,
that's right.
If you're looking for an accountant or maybe a partner in accounting,
there you go.
I don't know. If you want to go on a date with Scott, email us too.
That would be great, wouldn't it? You can't see my face, but I think I look fine.
Do you have any references for that?
No.
Okay. That's great. Well, my week was just fine. We started the week in Vegas and then made our way down to Arizona. We were in Vegas for graduation. That was really fun. And now we're here, and that's really fun too.
It's good to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be back every once in a while. But it is so dang hot here. I packed sweaters, and I'm wearing the sweaters, and I just end the day sweating.
Even in December.
We
still had an 80-degree day. I think it was last week.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's just horrible.
It's kind of weird.
So are you missing nails?
Oh my gosh. Nelson. Yes. I'll just remind all of our coffiners that my cat is, in fact, a boy cat. So his name is Nelson now,
Not Nell.
not Nelly. But yes, I do miss Nelson. We left him with my husband's aunt and her family, and they're having a hoot with him. They sent us a video yesterday of him climbing their brick wall. So that's a first for him. So we'll see if he tries to climb our little plaster walls when we take him home.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll see. It'll be good to be back, but it's fun to be here.
He's gonna hate going back to your house.
I know, it's far less fun. They have a dog. They have other cats. Yeah, he's in
Oh my
heaven there.
gosh, Wow.
He's not going to want to leave. But we have the second episode in our series of Phone a Funeral, brought to you by Scott. So, Scott, take us away.
Thanks, Holly.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, whatever.
Now that we're seeing each other's faces,
Yeah.
wow.
Great.
You
Yeah,
didn't
okay.
really mean the thank you all.
Okay, let's start off with a fun fact for Frank. A fun fact about Frank, and this is also in the form of a question. So a family friend wants to know. They know that you cannot taste and you cannot smell.
Okay.
Tell us about that.
So when I got into the funeral industry, I was able to taste and smell, obviously, but I've been in it since 1986. And in that course of time, I probably embalmed easily 1,000 people.
Oh my gosh.
And the stipulation was the embalming fluid is a carcinogen, so they always suggest that you use a respirator when you embalm, and I never did. I thought they were bulky and
It was the 80s.
yeah. You want to be a rebellious type of person. You can even be a rebellious person as an embalmer. I'm just letting you know. But yeah, I never did that. But I could sense when the fumes were really strong and pungent because my nose would burn, my eyes would water, my throat would start to burn when I started to swallow. So I never really thought much about it. And then one day I was sitting at home having my favorite meal and I couldn't taste a thing.
Oh, like COVID.
And I kind of like COVID. And I walked in and I couldn't smell the dinner that was making. I don't know if it was that my wife was making. I don't know if it was my birthday or whatever. And I was looking forward to the meal itself. But I remember distinctly not being able to taste anything. And I thought, surely this will pass. And as the meal progressed, as the weeks progressed, the months progressed, the years, it never came back. My smell and my taste never came back. So I think I liken it to the fact that I was embalming without a respirator.
Wow.
So what is that? The formaldehyde?
I think
Or
it's
is
the
it
formaldehyde.
formaldehyde. Yeah. And roughly an estimate, how long has it been?
Probably 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah.
Wow. So if
Maybe a little longer. And ask if I use a respirator now.
you use the respirator
Oh,
now,
great.
No.
are you hoping to counteract it? That I'll switch on again or something?
Oh, no. I will say this, though. I did bang my head real hard, the back of my head once, about 2 years ago. And I think for maybe 45 minutes, I was able to smell.
What?
Yeah.
Are
And
you
2 years ago?
serious?
about 2 years ago. And about 45 minutes, for about an hour, I'll say an hour just to round it, I could smell. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get home to tell people that I can smell. And I got home and I couldn't smell.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, it was just a brief moment. But
What a sick joke.
Wow.
thank you, whoever's
oh
playing
my
the joke.
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you ever lost any sense during COVID, then that is imagine 20 years.
Mhm.
Imagine 20 years
Yeah.
of that. That's pretty incredible.
Everyone asks, how do you still eat? Well, I get hungry. And then the other thing is that now you remember, it's a sense of remembering what foods tasted like. And if you really seriously think about it, like a French fry, there's a distinct taste to a French fry, mashed potato, a distinct taste to seared beef, chicken, a tomato, lettuce. All these little things, condiments are becoming harder and harder for me to remember. But texture plays an important part. So a lot of times people say, don't you like that? And if it's a brand new meal, I have kids that are fantastic at describing to me meals. If I say, I don't know what this is, I don't know what I'm tasting, because if I've never had it before, I have no idea what it is I'm dealing with. And so my kids will describe to me in kind of detail about what it is that they're tasting, and I can they liken it to a food that I've already had in the past. So grateful to them for that. So interesting question. Thank you.
Very interesting question. Let's go to the next one. This one comes from Clinton, and he asked, why are caskets so expensive? And can I buy a casket online and have it delivered to a funeral home?
So caskets are expensive because of the shape and make of the casket. Also, caskets will start, there's 19 gauge through 16 gauge, which 16 gauge becomes a stainless steel, and then you have your copper and your bronze. So copper and bronze, let's start at the high level. Copper and bronze, you know those because, well, they're a precious metal. So the more weight you get in a casket with a precious metal, just like gold, they're, what is it, $2,000 an ounce right now? It's ridiculous. But there are some caskets that have gold-plated hardware. And if you buy a casket with gold-plated hardware, then they charge you for the cost of the gold. Same thing goes with bronze or copper. I don't know what those exchange rates are right now for bronze or copper, but usually if it's a 48-ounce bronze or a 24-ounce bronze, they're expensive because that's per square foot on the casket. You're looking at 48 ounces of bronze that are incorporated into that metal. So that's how that works. Now, if you go to a 16 gauge is probably the most expensive of the sheet metal because it's the thicker. Here's an interesting question since we've been asked, how do you know the thickness of the casket? If I said it's a 19 gauge casket, what does that tell you? Anything? Do you have any ideas? What would you say? They're looking at each other, just so you know. They have no idea.
Gage, I've heard that because I've worked with you and things, and I was about to ask about that. I don't know. I have no idea. When you say gauge, I don't know what to think.
Is it the thickness of the walls?
The thickness of the sheet metal. So if I said this is a 20 gauge casket, that means that you stack 20 sheets of metal on top of one another to equal 1 inch.
Oh.
So if it's 19 gauge, is it thicker or less thick than 20 gauge?
Less.
No, it's thick. It's
What?
thicker because now it's 19 sheets of metal as opposed to 20 sheets. If I said 18 gauge metal, it's now only taking 18 sheets of metal to make up 1 inch instead of 20, right?
Oh, so the inch is still the inch is the standard, then 20 gauge takes 20 sheets to make that inch.
That's correct.
So if it was a 5 gauge casket, then you would only need 5 sheets to make an
Which
inch.
is stainless steel, roughly 16 gauge stainless steel. But yeah,
Oh, so it's the
So you see,
thickness of the metal.
that's correct.
Oh, okay.
So the 19 gauge,
Oh.
and then in your mind, if I said it was 19 gauge, you automatically think, okay, that's probably the thinnest metal, because if I said it was 28 gauge, who would buy that? The handles wouldn't even hold to the metal because it takes 28 sheets of metal to make up the 1 inch. That tells you how thin that metal is. So yeah, you want the thicker metal to be so going back to cost of casket, the original question, the cost of casket will vary on the gauge of metal or on the type of metal used to manufacture, fabricate the casket. So the thinner the metal, the less expensive the casket. The more heavy metal, the more expensive the casket. So 19 gauge, let's say, is $600. 16 gauge will be close to $3,000. So just be aware of that. That's a price variance there. The other question, Clint, thanks for the question, is yes, you can order caskets from other locations. Costco is very popular right now in getting caskets to mortuaries. Mortuaries will somehow get around that cost by charging you a handling fee. Any laugh track here? No, because funeral homes, they get angry when they lose. I don't care. I don't really care. But some funeral homes will charge a handling fee when they see a casket coming in from Costco, and they will not unpackage that casket unless a family member, most will not unpackage that casket unless a family member is there, because they want to make sure that the family is aware that when they unpackage the casket, if there's any damage, the mortuary did not create that damage. It came from the manufacturer. So there's our stipulations, but yes, you can go ahead and order a casket from another facility and have it delivered. And you can order it from another mortuary even and have it delivered to another mortuary. So anyway,
I have a follow-up question on that. Can you make your own casket?
you can indeed.
I was actually going to ask that same thing because we've done a few where people have made, where you and I have been helping people that had made their own casket. So tell us a little bit about what people have to be aware of if they are going to make their own casket. Do you remember the last one that we did? Yeah.
So we're just looking at each other, and I just mentioned I just did some hand movements as far as depth on a casket. But usually the depth of a casket, if you look at it, is usually about 24 inches deep. We did have one casket that was made by a family member, and the casket, no joke, was probably 3 feet deep.
Whoa.
And it was seriously hard to work with. And the guy was overweight, very hard to manipulate him getting him into the casket. And then the problem that you have with individuals making their own caskets is, number one, you don't know how the handles will hold the weight. You don't know if they're reinforced appropriately. And then the second item is you don't know if the cemetery is going to accept the handmade casket. And the reason why they won't accept it is because most burials, individuals or caskets have to be placed in what we've talked about, a vault or an outer burial container, something that the casket goes into, is then closed. It's usually a cement box, is then closed, and then the dirt is placed on top of the box. But if the family makes a casket too long for that vault, then the cemetery will refuse to accept that casket. Also, if it's too deep and they can't get the lid on the vault, then they won't accept it either. So it's always good when you do your own. No reason you can't do your own if you want to be that type of an individual where you can actually feel the need to make the casket. Man, more power to you. I couldn't do it. But if you wanted to do that, know that that is an option. And the only things you have to check with is make sure that the cemetery knows, make sure the funeral home knows you're going to build one first off. And then the funeral home should reach out to the cemetery and let them know that the family is providing them with a homemade casket. The other option or issue that you'll have with a homemade casket is if the person's going to be cremated, you have to make sure that the items on the casket are consumable by fire. You don't want to be able to have something on the casket that will not be burned or cremated at the time of once the casket's been placed in the retort or the chamber for cremation. And there's the other issue too, is the wideness on a casket going for cremation or the depth, because retorts or the cremation chambers are only so big and so wide. So you have to be aware of that as well. Great question.
Very interesting. Things that you don't really think about.
No.
And I mean, you see any TV show, even talking, which I know you've done probably in a previous episode, talking about the vaults and things.
I think we have.
Maybe not.
Maybe we'll
I
get
don't
into
think
that.
we have.
Okay,
Maybe
we'll
not.
get into that some other time then. Probably.
Well, yeah, but just interesting that, you see a lot of the stuff that you see on TV and movies is just not even close.
No.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Not
It's
even
Hollywood.
Yeah, not even close to accurate, which is kind of fun.
Funeral. Those 3 letters.
Yep.
Can't have
Fun.
funeral without fun. Well, okay, let's move on from that, I guess. Here's another question from Jan. She asks or rather, what is the most maybe forgotten part, or what you find to be the part of the funeral process, any part that maybe is the most forgotten or most commonly forgotten or overlooked?
Okay. So oddly enough, it's flowers. Flowers, and a lot of people will come in and specifically point blank, number one, ask to see the flower book. Okay, that's fine. But every family afterwards, they'll look at me and say, are we forgetting anything? Well, there's 2 items that always come to my mind. Printed programs. If you want any type of a printed folder or a prayer card for the service itself. We haven't discussed that. And number 2, flowers. Oh my gosh, I forgot all about flowers. How could we forget flowers? But yeah, so I would say that probably the most overlooked item is flowers. I will tell you a funny story though. This happened at another funeral home that I was not the director over, but I was overseeing the funeral. So I kept looking at the board, seeing a name on the board. And let's say, for instance, their service was to be on Wednesday. And I kept looking at the board, and Monday came along, Tuesday came along. And so I went up to the prep room to get the guy here. There he was he's just in a hospital gown. The family had forgotten to bring in clothing.
Oh my God.
Here we were 3 hours from the service. And so here we are trying to call them and get a hold of them, saying, we've never received clothing. That was definitely an error on the mortuary side. They should have been on top of it and kept right on that family to make sure that the clothes came in. But long story short, we had to go to the house, which was about 35 minutes away, picked up the clothes, came back, dressed the guy. So now we're an hour and 10 minutes in, maybe an hour and 15 minutes in. And the service was now 2 hours away, or before it began. So now we had 2 hours to get him dressed, casketed, and en route to the church.
Oh my.
We asked that they postpone it for an hour, and we got yelled at. Oh my gosh. When we got the casket to the church, we were yelled at, told we were incompetent, that we didn't oversee everything correctly. Long story short, they got their services for free. And because the error, and you can't say this to a family, you just can't say, well, you're the one that didn't get us the clothing. You're the one. You see how awkward that would be on the mortuary's end. So yeah, the clothing in some instances will be the last thing that some people will remember, which is odd to me. It's just odd. You've got a funeral coming up and you want to get them. You have a service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything's set. We're all ready. Are you though?
Are you?
Yeah.
So anyway,
that's actually a great segue into another question that was sent in. And this one is pretty similar to, on that same vein. It says, hey, if I'm preparing a loved one for an open casket viewing, who can come in and help dress? Can the hair be washed and styled? Can alterations be done to their face or to their overall look? How does that work?
So that's another good question. So let's just take it apart. The first question is who can come in and help and assist? Anyone can come in and help and assist, provided you are okay with them being there. So there is no stipulation as to who can come in and help or who won't be there. They won't be there unless you've requested they be there and have invited them, number one. Number two, during the embalming process, the hair is generally washed. The entire body is washed and cleaned and sanitized. And so you then, at that moment when the dressing is done, you have the opportunity to do the additional styling if that's what you want to do with the hair. If you don't want to do it, then we have hairstylists on staff that we can go ahead and hire to come in and do their hair. And then any makeup, anything like that, we can go ahead and have completed as well, depending upon what it is you want to have done and how you want them to be presented. I always caution families when they come in to do the hair, how much of the hair do you think they really need to do?
Just the front.
Just the front.
Yeah.
Just the top half of the crown of the head. Don't worry about the backside, nothing like that, because that's in a pillow. But yeah, so you just worry about what's on the sides or right on the bang. And so some families still want to go ahead and do the full head, and she really liked the curls on the back of her hair, back of her head, and okay, not much we can do about that. So anyway, did I hit every point of that question?
Yes.
Okay. So that is essentially what I would be looking at as far as any individuals that wanted to come in. Number one, do not worry about having people come in and assist you. That is more than appropriate. And we as funeral homes will be there helping as well.
I have a follow-up question. Is that just on the day of the service that you
No.
go and do that? Or When is it done?
It's usually done 2 days before the service.
2 days before.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the only reason I say that is because when they're not casketed, by the time everything is done, the dressing, hair, cosmetics is usually done 2 days before, maybe the day before. But I always like to have everything set. If you do it the day of, too many things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we've talked about this before, but sometimes when bodies are embalmed, they'll sweat because and so you want to make sure the clothing isn't going to be soiled, and you just want to make sure that everything is set in order. So anyway, yeah, I wouldn't do it the same day. I would always suggest either the day before or 2 days before the service.
One last quick follow-up question that I have, pretty much regarding that same thing, is I've helped you a number of times getting individuals into caskets and things like that. And I don't know if every mortuary does this, but you always position the head slightly so that they're at an angle and kind of looking. So if you were the person in the casket, your head would be tilted slightly to the right, or I guess to the left, depending on the orientation of the room and the casket, but so that you're kind of facing the people that will be standing there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very interesting. Is there any other kind of like hidden fact or hidden little gem that you might not realize about the casketing process?
Yes. So there's two others that I'm going to mention. I'm going to hit the nose thing for just a minute. And this is kind of a fun little experiment to do for yourself. If you're lying in bed, take it and just realize where your nose is located on your face, and then just kind of tilt your head just a little bit to the right foot on your big toe. That's what we look for. So when you tip your head, when you turn the head, and it's not so obvious of a turn that they're staring at you, looking at you, they're kind of looking off just to the side, and it's just enough to where if you're laying down, you can take your nose and just kind of point it to the right toe of your right foot, right big toe. And that's the positioning of the head once it's on the pillow. Now, once you're in the casket, there's lowering devices of that bed. You can either raise or lower it. And usually what I do is I take 3 fingers and I place them on top of one another, and I just set them right on the edge or lip of the casket. And I just look, that index finger, the top index finger should be right at the tip of that nose. That's how deep you want them in the casket. Any deeper than people feel like they're having to look into the casket, any higher than something just looks off. So that's about the medium point that you want to look at as far as lowering and raising in position of the body. The last thing is the hands. And I don't know if many people pay attention to the hands, but there is superstition about guilt centered around death. And so if you look at the person's hands, if the left hand is on top of the right, what's happening? You've got 4 fingers that are pointing at you, and you don't want that because they look at you. They look at you and say, "Oh my gosh, they're pointing at me." They're creating. It's in your mind but you always want to change it because you want the right hand on top of the left always, because now there are no fingers pointing directly at you. So that is just something to take into consideration the next time you go into a viewing. The next time you see hands that have been placed and you go, "Oh, they placed them wrong." And I always do that. And I look at Lisa and I say, "What? Do you see what I'm seeing?" And fictional Lisa, I mean, because we don't really know that she exists, according to one of the other listeners who sent in the picture or a question.
Yeah. For that reference, Coffners, I don't think we've talked about it. One of our listeners, that is a good friend of ours.
A good coffiner.
Yes. Emailed in and said, can we have Lisa on the show? And immediately my mom goes, "No."
So to us, she doesn't exist.
Yeah, she's just a figment right now of our imaginations.
Yeah. So any other questions on that? That's kind of interesting. And I would like to take one episode later and just tell you how we build features and how we get to the dimensions on how we can be so accurate and so close on building features. That is to me, that's my favorite part of the job. I just love to do that. So
yeah,
anyway.
Absolutely. I think that would be great. And there are a lot of little intricate pieces, especially in the casketing process, that you would not think about. And it's really cool to see. But I think that's a good chunk of material there from questions.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there's nothing further, we'll just go ahead and move on to our viewer submitted stories. Spooky stories.
Let's hear it.
All right. So this coffiner says, "Hey, Holly and Frank, I've got one for you. Your shadow person story about Cowboy Bob brought this one to mind. This is a story of when I saw a shadow person who I believe may have had malicious intent while I was living in eastern Malaysia. I was living in a city named Kuching. While in Malaysia, I was serving as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ, and I lived with one other missionary who was a Malaysian native from the Iban tribe. I want to give what I deem a bit of relevant background on the Iban tribe, if you're unfamiliar with them, to set up the story. In previous generations, the Iban tribe was known as the headhunters of Borneo because they would decapitate their enemies. The decapitated heads would then anciently be used in spiritual rituals of one sort or another, for example, in a rain dance ritual. I share this to note that although headhunting days are long gone, members of the tribe tend to be more superstitious. For example, in their burying rituals, they will place the deceased person's possessions on top of the grave, and although it may sound like this would be prone to looting, no one will touch it because they're afraid that they will be haunted if they do. They're also big believers in dreams, as many others in the world. They believe dreams have meaning and should be followed. Now that the background's established, I would like to share my story with shadow people. It began as my fellow missionary and I were living in a 3-story Chinese-style townhouse that shared a wall with our neighboring house. The house was 3 levels, so that Chinese families could live together with multi-generations in one house. It was a nicer and newer established neighborhood, but it was relatively vacant. On one occasion, we did some missionary exchanges, and so I left to go to another area in the city, and another missionary came in to take my place and be with my fellow Iban missionary. That missionary that I exchanged with was from New Zealand and was relatively new in Malaysia. My fellow Iban missionary decided to play a prank on him and tell him our house was haunted. This missionary from New Zealand freaked out and said that night he felt somebody tickling his foot and he wasn't able to sleep the rest of the night. When I heard about this, I just kind of laughed it off and chalked it up to him being freaked out by my friend's story. Then one morning when I woke up, my fellow missionary said, "Hey, did you hear the footsteps last night on our stairs?" I assumed that he was just hearing the neighbors on their stairs because our shared wall had our stairs on our side of the wall and the neighbors' stairs on their side of the wall. As we left that day, I looked at our neighbor's house and saw that it was vacant because it had a big sign in the window saying it was looking for tenants. I thought this was strange, but disregarded it and forgot about the noise heard on the stairs. A few nights later, as I was showering, the other missionary turned off the lights in the bathroom as a prank on me. In Malaysia, the lights are on the outside of the bathroom, so it's relatively easy to do so. Once again, he likes to play pranks, so I just asked him to turn it back on, and he did. When I finished my shower, he showered, and after he showered, he said, "Hey, why did you turn the lights off on me?" I told him I did not turn the lights off on him, but he said while he was showering, the lights turned off, and he said, "Okay, very funny, turn them back on." And the lights were turned back on. So now I'm starting to think that maybe something strange was going on, but I still wasn't sold on that idea. Either the next morning or a few mornings later, my fellow missionary woke up from a dream in which somebody had been in our room and put their hand on his face, totally covering it up so that when he woke up, he felt an impression of someone's hand on his face. By this point, it was starting to get weird. And so we asked a member of the congregation about previous missionaries who had lived in the house and found out that they had been hearing noises in their kitchen at night and that the house was built on an old Chinese cemetery. Of course it was. Sure, okay. As skeptical as I was, pretty soon I started hearing someone walking on our stairs at night. I made sure to lock our bedroom door every night because it freaked me out. But I could hear someone distinctly walking on our stairs. Then one night, as I was kneeling down praying in our room, after the lights had been turned off, I opened my eyes to see a shadow person directly next to me at the side of my bed. The shadow person seemed to be leaning in as if trying to get close to me and was literally directly next to me. I jumped up, heart racing, out of my chest and hit the light above my bed. The other missionary shared a room with me and had already been asleep, and I woke him up when I hit the lights and he asked what I was doing. I was breathing heavy, looking all around the room, trying to see what I had just seen, but it was gone. I left Malaysia a few weeks later, and eventually they ended up moving all missionaries out of that house because occurrences kept happening, and it got bad enough that they needed them out. I never expected to live in a haunted house in Malaysia, and I never expected to see a shadow person. But it was very disconcerting, and I could not wait to get out of that house. I'm not sure the full intent because no one was ever injured or hurt, but it did not feel calming in any way, shape, or form. It felt wrong and bad, which makes me think that the shadow person may have had malicious intent. When I heard your story about Cowboy Bob, I knew I had to share because this sort of thing has happened to me as well. Thanks for your podcast. Love it. And from a podcast fan.
Wow. So, we had, when the first episode about Shadow Bob came out, remember we said we were going to ask if anyone had actually experienced, hey, Coffiners, how's it going with shadow people? This is a perfect example of what we were talking about. So I'm glad he shared it. But it's interesting that a lot of times people would look at these experiences and call them pranks, right? Like what he was experiencing there, and then come to find out that they were actually happening. And man, yeah, that brings all sorts of floods of memories back to me with Shadow Bob.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, what are your thoughts, Scott?
I just think it's cool how you can have an experience, in the United States where we are at,
Mm-hmm.
and then you turn around and you hear one from someone who lived in Malaysia. And it's just kind of interesting to think about, what's the bigger picture, what really is going on. And obviously death is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so why wouldn't these happenings be all over the place kind of thing?
Yeah, and isn't that kind of cool that he lived in a 3-generation house, or a 3-story house specifically meant for multiple generations of a family? I would think if I was living in a house that old, I'm like, okay, who else is living in this house? Because
Mm-hmm.
it was their family home their entire life. So I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't leave.
Plus over the cemetery.
Yeah, of course. They just throw in that caveat. It's over an old Chinese cemetery. Okay, yeah.
And then I find it interesting too, where he'd become alert or opened his eyes from prayer and witnessed the thing leaning in. That's kind of interesting to me. What was he leaning in for?
Yeah.
So
it sounded like this one was kind of a prankster. Maybe he was just trying to scare him.
Could be. I don't know. It obviously worked.
Yeah, it definitely
Everyone
worked.
cleared out of there. So
Oh my gosh.
wow, very interesting. Thank you, podcast fan. I'm going to call you Coffiner.
Coffiner, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you guys have any other questions or any other comments that you might want to make?
Oh, I don't know. I guess for that fan specifically, if there is a follow-up, have you had anything like that since? Or was it just in Malaysia?
We should go back to the last story.
Oh,
Remember
you're right.
what
Yes.
she sent in a response to was it your question, Scott, where you had asked what was the girl's response?
The daughter's
Oh,
reaction.
sure. Yeah.
Did you get that message?
I don't think I got it.
Did you get
I
the
did
message?
get a
You
message
remember
back
what the
from
message
her.
was?
And she said, so after explaining to the daughter, I didn't come into your room at night and I didn't growl. By the way, if you haven't heard this story, go back to our Phone and Funeral episode 1. It's fantastic. And she said her daughter was just terrified. As
Did
you
she
would
think it was
expect.
a tiger or something? She thought it was a tiger.
She thought it was a tiger or a cat or
Yeah.
something. But she was terrified after knowing that originally she thought it was her mom.
Yeah.
And then she tried to kind of explain it away.
Yeah. But then I think she finished by saying, I'm lucky. No, I guess we're blessed that we didn't find tiger tracks in the house, because then she would have been totally frantic.
Right.
Something like that. I don't remember exactly how she phrased it, but
Oh,
yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to that episode and sending that response. That was very important.
fantastic.
So that was appropriate time to bring that up as well.
Mm-hmm. I think that experiences like this are so much more common, and it's not something that you tend to want to remember. So it's really interesting sharing those and seeing, oh, this has happened to people around the world. Like, this is definitely a thing, and it's not something that can just be explained away.
Right. Yeah. Very.
Or chalked up to pranks. I know at the beginning of your career, you chalked up a couple things to pranks, and we'll go
and it
into
should
that.
not have. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go into that
Mhm.
in depth later, but scary stuff. Thank you so much, Coffiner, for sending in that story. I hope that you haven't had any further experiences with that. Are there any further comments from Scott? Any signing off words until our fans get to hear from you again?
No. Happy to be here.
What about the how can they reach us, Holly?
Oh, yes, of course. You can email us for if you have any interesting stories like the one we just heard. If you have any questions, if you're looking for an accountant, email us at letsbefrank@coffintalkin.com. But ultimately, thanks everyone for listening in to another episode. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Email us wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Coffin Talkin', and we'll see you next week.
Bye, Coffners.